This is Sirens, a new series, maybe not so new, but still awesome, brought to you by the ladies of Bombshell, where we dissect the institutions of American power. Join us as we sound the alarm on technology, governance, and national security, and most definitely, at every possible time, lure some men to their deaths. I'm Loren DeYoung-Schulman.
I'm Radha and Loren.
And this week, we have an amazing guest to talk us through what is going on in Iran with Dana Stroul. But before we get there, I want to start with a question that you would definitely believe that I have strong answers around because of the number of boxes in my sunroom right now, which is, what is your favorite recent Amazon purchase? Radha, do you have a favorite?
Okay, I do. And it's these book lights. Here's the thing. Santa discovered these book lights as stocking stuffers in December.
Yep.
And Santa has a tendency to forget that there are four humans in this family, and sometimes only gets three, and then feels sad that the fourth person who is there, namely me, does not have a book light. So these book lights are amazing. First of all, they clip on to the book with the bookmark-like quality.
Incredible.
Second, they then fold flat, so they aren't really bulky. And then they have a variety of different light levels and a little timer on them. But they're only you can't see me because this is a podcast and we don't do video, but they're only about say the length of a finger. So it's just the perfect book light. And I am a person who sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night and wishes to read for a little bit before going back to sleep. And having an effective book light with both dimmers and timers is just great. And my kids use them. It's just the greatest book light. I feel like I'll drop it in the comments when we post this because
what I love about this is I literally asked for a book light for Christmas this year because I likewise wake up in the middle of the night and want to read a book sometimes. And my book light also makes me extremely happy, but I didn't purchase it. So I will mention for myself, I really love having a variety of cloth napkins in my life.
Oh,
to the degree that now whenever I search on Amazon for, I don't say variety packs, but that's effectively what it is. Variety packs of cloth napkins, which are basically just here's a bunch of random napkins that we threw in a box that have different patterns together. It's amazing because there are some that are kind of random scraps of cloth that maybe some lady had from her quilting. Maybe it's actual napkins that didn't actually make it to be shipped to somebody else. But when you start going down this path, you start buying a lot of napkins. So if you come to my house for dinner, don't you worry, you will have a napkin for your face, and it will definitely not match with the napkin that is your next door neighbor's because I have so many variety packs of cloth napkins in my house, and it makes me very happy.
What listeners don't know is Lauren also has the most amazing glassware collection of assortative glasses of a variety of types that makes you feel like you're vaguely in a whimsical French cafe. And so I feel like the napkins plus the glassware, it just really gives a vibe.
100%. And this is, if you ever just start to feel down about your life, if you go down the path of searching, pick a color, blue vintage glassware on Etsy, you will basically generate another personality for yourself. So just as a piece of advice, just try to get it going. All right. We have a lot going on in the world today. I'm going to start with It's a Drill with some Western Hemisphere shenanigans. And what's amazing about this is when Radha pitched it as we should talk about this, in my head I'm thinking I can think of two. And as it turns out, there's a lot of Western Hemisphere shenanigans. So Radha, tell us more.
So I will know this came about because longtime listeners will know that I love a good Google alert.
Mm-hmm.
And when the recent National Defense Strategy noted Western Hemisphere as our priority area, I thought I should put some terms in related to Western Hemisphere and see how this changes my Google alerts and newsfeed. And so now I get all sorts of interesting stories about the Western Hemisphere some of which I'm sure we will know about. And anyway, so here we are, which I noticed in the last few weeks. It's wow, a lot of stuff's going on. So people will know, of course, that El Mencho, who is a cartel leader, was killed in a raid in Jalisco. There was U.S. intelligence support. This is a slightly complicated because the Mexican government has had a mixed approach on how to deal with cartels, but bottom line, killed, and then like all hell broke loose, basically. And there was a bunch of fighting. There was like 70 to 100 people killed. There were National Guard members from Mexican National Guard members killed. There is a power vacuum and some fighting. And I'll note two things, which is the fighting is concentrated in areas, so it's not like all of Mexico is under fire, but also this was not super calm way to take out leadership. And so, I'm interested to see kind of where we are in that. And at the same time, there was a shootout with a speedboat where 10 armed Cuban Americans stole a Florida boat and entered Cuban waters. The Cuban Coast Guard killed 4, wounded 6. They seized a bunch of assault rifles, Molotov cocktails, and night vision devices. And Cuba is calling this a foiled terrorist intervention. I'll just note things are a little on edge in Cuba generally because there's a big energy crisis because they depend on Venezuelan oil, which has been largely cut off following the Maduro seizure operation, which brings me to Venezuela, which folks may remember. We went in there and kidnapped/seized, I don't know what word we're using for this, we gathered their president and brought him to New York, which,
we gently encouraged him to come.
I guess he's either appearing in a New York courtroom or high kicking his way through New York. Time will tell. But there are a bunch of political prisoners still in jail, hardliners still in charge of the security forces, some limited U.S. naval presence in the Caribbean, except they sent everyone else to the Middle East. More on that later in the show. And there's not a real democratic transition, but they have found the vice president who's maybe willing to do business with the president. So that's where we are there. And if you thought that was all that was happening, you'd be wrong, because there's also Peru, where Peru's Congress removed its president over undisclosed meetings with a Chinese businessman who was holding active government contracts. And this is part of a bigger story where the U.S. House Select Committee has identified a number of Chinese-linked space and surveillance facilities across Latin America just this week. And just if you were thinking that it was only political and military issues, to close out the week in Brazil, there was a massive catastrophic flood with 55 dead, thousands displaced, and rainfall about 3 times that above normal. So basically, Loren, we've got a dead drug lord, a speedboat shootout, a captured president in New York, a Chinese corruption scandal, and biblical floods. And I give you February in the Western Hemisphere.
So when you started this, at first I thought, maybe it's just that it's an entire hemisphere and we don't pay enough attention to it. But I honestly, now that we've gotten to the end, this seems like a lot. An exceptionally lot. And maybe, honestly, let's be real, February is so gray and boring here, but it's not in all parts of the Western Hemisphere that we're talking about.
Correct.
So maybe they're experiencing their own sort of weird February reactions to what's going on.
Sure, I'll give you that. Can you tell me what might be happening with the Trump administration and some EPA shenanigans?
I can. So I really love the name of this policy, the Endangerment finding, which is not actually about wild animals. So just to give it a little more context here, a couple weeks ago, on the day I launched an entire massive new organization about regulatory ingenuity and climate. Thank you, Trump administration. The Trump administration killed the Endangerment finding, which is a 2009 EPA determination about greenhouse gases. It was stating that they endanger public health, which was basically the big legal structural piece of policy that is the basis of more or less all, not all, but quite a bit of all of federal climate regulation. So basically, everything that came after saying, here's all the reasons that you have to stop doing things, start doing things, measure how you're doing things, was based on the endangerment finding. Lee Zeldin called this the single largest deregulatory action in American history, and he is probably not wrong. And some climate advocates, myself possibly included, are saying that, like, so yes, this was a big deal. This was really bad. We should be very, very, very mad and sad. This is very bad. Not are saying, like, actually, we should have seen some of this coming, because the revocation of all of this shows something that, like, we should have all realized a while ago, which is that the building the entire federal regulatory architecture on this one scientific add-on was always going to be pretty fragile. Our entire legal apparatus around climate change is based on structures that were built in the 70s to halt or slow or mitigate pollution, as opposed to all of the actions that we need to take today. And with all the changes that have happened over the last few years when it comes to legal deference and understanding of the role of the executive branch, whether it be Chevron deference and Loper Bright, the Western Virginia versus EPA and the major questions doctrine, the fact that Congress has really never passed a big actual piece of legislation authorizing greenhouse gas regulation, all of these things add up to being a big weakness in how we think about managing climate change. So an argument to consider is to separate from the fact that, like, this was a bad thing to do, a big deal, and, like, a problem. It's also a moment to say, like, maybe this was not actually an entire death blow, but a moment of reckoning to say we need a different legal foundation for how we manage climate change. That's going to take a ton of work. And I think that it's something that we're not entirely prepared to grapple with, but it's going to take in this mid-transition moment where we're dealing with a big economic and energy transition at the same time as we are many other things. It's going to bring a whole lot of other tools to the table in terms of, like, what kind of toolkit we need next. So all that endangerment finding and big deal, possible opening to say, like, all right, maybe what is the next thing that we need that is actually going to hold up from a legal basis in order to address climate change?
I do think there may be some opening here, ironically generated by the big big energy demands from data centers, where we're looking at, even solar now, and certainly nuclear. And I think that opens a conversation on some of these regulatory issues that had to date been hard to generate proactive support elements for. Yeah. So maybe.
Yeah. Coming at it directly versus sideways, a better thing for democracy, hopefully better thing for climate too. Okay. Last but not least, I have mentioned this a couple of times in different ways, but this is an OPM has finally proposed their draft forced distribution policy of federal employee performance ratings, basically meaning that agencies have to grade a fixed percentage of their workforce as low performers, middle performers, higher performers, in the same way that you would have done a test when you were in middle school, regardless of where they actually are. And their justification is not bad. There is some interesting data that comes out with 43% of federal employees getting outstanding ratings in the last year. That is probably great inflation in some ways, maybe, but also maybe not, because maybe you're just getting some really exceptional public servants. But here's the thing. I would like to call the 1980s and say that you should take your workforce management policy back, because the business world already ran lots of experience in this space. You've heard about it through Jack Welch. Microsoft did this. Amazon still kind of does this. Enron, our dear friend Enron. And most of them, after, in some ways, abandoned it based on, one, it didn't really work, but also discrimination lawsuits. A lot of the collaborative talent that you would want to have, where, like, people are playing different roles, ended up not working out or walking out. And then a lot of the data, a lot of the overall variance reflected individual manager bias rather than actual performance, which is maybe not exactly what you want. And so there is a proposed rule that's out right now. There's a comment period that's going on. So if you would like to offer some comments, that runs through March 26th. Many federal agencies have already said this is a bad idea. And OPM, I love this, OPM told press that those comments do not reflect official agency positions, even though they did. So the federal government is adopting a management practice that the private sector tried, really realized was both bad, didn't work, and also got litigated the hell out of. So they have decided that this is their next big thing. I wish them the best of luck, and hopefully with the comment period that is up by the end of March, they will decide maybe this isn't the best approach.
I have great confidence in their data-driven approaches.
Indeed. We have some dumpster fires that we are excited about. First of all, I'm going to start with an acronym that I always love saying because it sounds sort of like an Egyptian god. NBIS.
Oh my God. We should totally draw an Egyptian god of it.
Yep. The National Background Investigation Services System. All right, Radha. Who am I? Are you teeing this up? Am I teeing this up? Or I can let you tee it up and we can both chat about it.
I'll tee it up. So in February, Congress held yet another hearing on NBIS. So this is the system that the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency uses to manage background investigations for basically all, like 95% of the federal government. So think, 4 million employees and contractors. And the goal of NBIS was to replace a legacy system. And you may remember that legacy system from the one that was hacked in 2015 and exposed a lot of personal information on like tens of millions of federal employees. And it was also supposed to be done in 2019. You may note that it is well past 2019 in the current year of our Lord 2026. And it is not supposed to be done until, 2028-ish. It's like the big dig of government policies, really. The acting director of DCSA, this Defense Counterintelligence Security Agency, told Congress the project is exceptionally fragile. And I think a core issue here is a lot of the people, myself included, frankly, who are working on this in a day-to-day way, left and are no longer focused on it. And so that leaves us with many questions on how the federal government is going to vet all of these people for trusted and secure positions. So maybe we can start, Loren, by talking about what's actually changed since 2015. And, as someone kind of who looked at it from the outside and tried to manage the process, how would you grade the reform effort to date?
All right. So I first want to give credit to some of my former colleagues that you did. So if you want to say trusted traveler, that is not what it is. Trusted traveler 2.0. When you look, it's not that. When you look at what has actually changed since 2015, the move to DCSA, continuous vetting, the backlog reduction, there's a lot of things that have actually genuinely gotten better. And I think it's good to kind of break the mythology around this. We had a huge backlog of the security clearance cases, close to 1 million as of like 2018 or so. And that's been driven down significantly. And where, frankly, still a lot of the backlog is in the contractor community, but it is a major improvement that the backlog is not nearly so significant, because that has impact around mission, is that impact around delivery of services from contractors and so on. We are gradually working away from this method of periodic investigations, which if you have security clearance, you may remember every 5 years or 10 years, depending on what kind of clearance you had. That was a snapshot to a more continuous vetting process that runs automated checks on cleared personnel in, let's say, closer to real time. So that, let's say you got arrested one night or you got a DUI or things like that, that would turn up quickly rather than waiting for the next investigation. Social media is now part of the vetting process, for better or for worse. This is a lot. And the SF-86 has actually been, or is being replaced by, a new vetting questionnaire that modernizes some of the questions, has new approaches to how it asks things, has generally a more, if not genuinely friendly, but like friendlier approach to how this is being done. And a lot of that function has been consolidated in theory, which creates accountability that didn't really exist. However, we still had lots of problems where TS investigations still take a really long time. A big difference between the goal of 80-ish days versus 200-ish days, which is where we are today. And some of that is people problem, some of it's process, but a lot of it is this IT fragmentation that we're going to talk about today, where adjudicators have to spend a lot of time in data reconciliation that a modern integrated system would just like handle. We also have some gaps that we see in security around the existing system that the GAO continues to hound the US government on, which continues to pose some of the same vulnerabilities that we saw the Chinese take advantage of. And with all of this, as long as things are delayed, there are obvious mission impacts where if you need somebody urgently and they don't have a clearance and they can't do this today, that's a problem. So where people either get an interim clearance where they are waiting and waiting and waiting to do their roles, or their agencies simply don't hire because it's just frankly cheaper and easier for them to do.
So you've given us a little bit of a sense of this already, but I mean, obviously the core issue here is that we've got a bunch of legacy systems running a process that needs to both improve in scale and speed. So maybe let's think about this let's reframe this in a positive way. So there's been a real problem here, and here we are. What does an actual fix to this mean? And I mean that not in the let me wave my AI magic wand, but what does it mean to fix this process and structure rather than just org charts or two?
Yeah. So what NBIS is supposed to do is integrate systems across the case initiation, like you're starting your clearance, the background investigation, the adjudication of that, and continuous vetting. So it's all in one integrated system, as opposed to being disparate ones that have to be kludged together in some way. That should allow for automation. It should allow for more machine readable data to replace a lot of things that people were doing before and just reading through and seeing what they're seeing in real time. It should allow for a better understanding of where clearances are at. Those of you who have hired people before or who have been in a system like this before know that there's so many phone calls that get made to investigators around where's the status at? How quickly can this move? What happens in this space? Where this allows, hopefully, in theory, can allow for more transparency around where things stand. And I think one of the things most important is it should allow for better utilization of the continuous vetting capability so that you have more automated checks on the folks who are already cleared rather than waiting for that every 5-year, 10-year process. All of that means both a better and faster process, but also more transparency for those who are actually managing this day to day. And also you get people you don't have to lose talent because they are waiting days, weeks, months, even sometimes years to be able to get jobs that they are the best person in the world for. So it has a lot of potential to be able to be when this is done right, it has a lot of potential to make a huge difference.
I mean, just riffing on that for 1 second, and then I'll ask you one question just to close this all out. But I think the key piece you noted here, we're talking about people in the government system, but this also impacts contractors, is the time to delivery here really matters. And the time is not just long, it's also unpredictably long, which I think makes it really hard to plan and think about what to do. So maybe, to what extent do you think this is something that needs management attention, that this is something that needs different contractors, so this is something that needs culture or leadership? Where if you were going to wave a magic wand and try to think about really trying to fix this situation, how much would you focus on this culture and leadership piece versus other parts of the puzzle?
I mean, culture and leadership is not a small piece of this. I think that for too long, it was, despite the fact that there was lots of senior leaders who were paying attention to it, the specifics of it were delegated down too far. And you see this happen a lot with complex contracting within the federal government, where there are contracts being executed the people overseeing them simply do not have the knowledge, the technical knowledge to be able to oversee. And I think that is exactly what is happening here with NBIS, where the the overall architecture of like, here's what we want to, look, people can articulate what the goals are. The day-to-day, what that actually looks like in practice in terms of building the tech stack and the product of delivery and the testing and iteration that it requires. We just haven't had the leaders in place who understood all of that in a way to be able to say, I'm going to call bullshit. That's not working the way it's supposed to. Here's the things I would expect. Versus those who would say, like, here's a general goal. Like, so long as you meet it, I don't really care what the thing below the hood is. And that's understandable because, like, that's how a lot of federal contracts work. Like, is to be able to say, like, here's the overall goal. You guys go figure it out and I'll see it later. What we're finding increasingly is that that is just not, first of all, it's not cheap. And second of all, it's just not viable because those who are executing on the contracts also don't necessarily understand. So you need to have leaders who be able to like understand in an integrated way what it is that they're designing for, the kind of time, flexibility, and iteration that is required to be able to execute on it. And then also how you test it on the way to make sure that you're actually doing the things you need to do. In some of that's culture, some of that's leadership, but a lot of it is frankly technical know-how that we have allowed to deteriorate, not just in the leadership levels, but in the contract oversight levels at DOD, but also in a lot of agencies. And it's a big fix that we need to make in our talent processes.
Yeah. Probably not super aided by getting rid of a lot of that talent in the early Doge days, but
no,
here we are.
Probably not. Probably not. Speaking of, let's talk about the Pentagon and artificial intelligence, which is just such a boring, not in the news topic as of today at all. All right. So we've been talking about U.S. government and particularly Department of Defense use of artificial intelligence on and off over the last year or so for this podcast. And there we have really, really like escalated all of the things in the last week or so with the Pentagon and Anthropic, which is one of the United States' leading AI companies. And they are very much not friends right now, not because things are costing too much, but effectively over ethics and principles. Who gets to decide what and how the military gets to use technology that it buys? And I think it's such a fascinating set of questions around, should Anthropic be able to create rules around this? Or does the Department of Defense, because they paid for it, get to say, like, here's how we're going to use it? And what happens when those answers don't work together? Who ends up getting to decide and how? So, Radha, can you just talk through a little bit of what exactly is going on in this mild fight that we are seeing between the Department of War and a very, very powerful AI company? And we'll talk through what it means after that.
Yeah. Okay. So taking a big step back, the Department of Defense has lots of different ways it uses artificial intelligence. I'll just note, I will bucket it in two big areas, which is warfighting and the business of warfighting. And the business of warfighting is like finance and human resources and all of that. And just put all of that to the side, because that is going to be impacted by this in the medium term, but isn't the focus of this particular focus. So this is in actual warfighting. How does it use AI? And there's a whole range of ways that the department wants to use it, from operational planning to training and deploying autonomous weapon systems to the targeting process and everything in between. So to do that, the DoD has contracts with its major provider, which is Palantir, and then Palantir works with a number of frontier AI companies, notably Anthropic, to try to deliver these capabilities into classified networks. And Anthropic was sort of the first out of the gate and probably largely seen as the most capable and relevant system to integrate into these classified military networks for particular work. Those contracts had acceptable use policies, which Anthropic in particular, but all of the AI companies have, which are aimed at limiting how the models can be used in particular types of operating uses. And their big red lines relate to mass surveillance of US citizens and fully autonomous weapons. That is, weapons that are identifying identifying, selecting, and executing targets without any human intervention, right? So all three of those steps without any human intervention. Okay. So Anthropic had some questions and concerns about, as reported in the news. I will note I have long been out of the Pentagon and have no inside information about this, but as reported in the news, that Anthropic had some questions about how their model was used in recent operations in Venezuela, and that prompted a set of conversations with the Pentagon that resulted in late February with Hexit asking the CEO of Anthropic to come to the Pentagon and basically agree to any lawful use of Claude. So that meant that as long as it was legal, Claude could be used. And Anthropic's position was roughly, basically, the laws haven't caught up to what AI can do. We don't think the technology is super reliable. And so we are not sure that you have the right kind of operational testing and evaluation. And we don't think the laws have considered the full range in which AI can integrate and deploy rapid information. And so we don't think the lawful standard is sufficient. And the Pentagon said, we are the judges of what appropriate use is. Once we've bought it, you can't tell us where we can fire. If we bought a missile from you, you couldn't tell us which targets we could fire it at. We bought an AI system from you, you can't tell us which things we can use it at. That resulted in a rapid escalation with Trump truthing. Are we calling it truthing? Truthing?
I don't know, but I really like it.
Okay. Truthing that Anthropic was a bunch of left-wing nut jobs, and then the Pentagon tweeting that they were declaring Anthropic a supply chain risk. And as we're recording this Tuesday, my understanding is no actual documents have been sent from the Pentagon to Anthropic, at least again as reported in the news, but that's a designation that's typically reserved for foreign adversaries. I'll just note in rounding out this story that two other things. One is that the Pentagon has been trying to sign agreements they signed with Sam Altman's OpenAI, like the same night they broke up with Anthropic, which is like a little bit like, you know, having a new girlfriend the night you break up with your old girlfriend. Like, I mean, man, you don't have to do it Friday, like give it the weekend. So even Sam Altman admitted the optics are bad. And also a bunch of employees in OpenAI and Google signed open letters basically supporting Anthropic in questioning this OpenAI deal and what was there. So that's kind of where we are.
Wow. Okay. And also just PS, like Sam Altman's tweets were, I admired them for being so awkward and vulnerable as they are, while also being like, wow, like, I just want to press rewind on like 5 years and just go back a little while before we had to deal with any of this. Okay. So this is fascinating to me because the conversation that is being had between DOD and Anthropic is wrestling with questions that the Pentagon has been talking about for a while. And we both have, you have dealt with this. I have some former colleagues when I worked at CNAS who worked quite hard around how the Pentagon should be using AI and autonomous systems. And in none of those conversations, I don't want to speak for you, but in none of those conversations that I've been privy to, did anyone feel as though they were comfortable? It was more that like there is friction and we're doing the best we can, but we are trying to learn a lot all the time on like what the best possible uses are, given how much these systems are changing. So I'd love to, if you could just ground us a little bit, like what does responsible AI mean in a defense context? And how has the Pentagon been working through that question? And does it have like a framework that it's been relying on?
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with what high level. What does responsible AI mean? Responsible AI means that your AI system does the things you want it to do and doesn't do the things you don't want it to do. That's it in a nutshell. Okay. So the Pentagon's journey here has been, I'll call it sawtooth. It started off with a big spike up, which is the Department of Defense, then the Department of Defense, was the first military to adopt these AI ethical principles. It was signed under actually the Trump one, under Secretary Esper, and it included these principles of responsible, equitable, traceable, reliable, and governable. And this framework was actually a pretty serious and substantive effort to try to bake in ethics into acquisition and deployment and sort of lay a marker, proactive marker on how AI could be used. That was followed up with this DOD Directive 3000.09, which was actually a relatively old directive, but it was updated in 2023 and provides this foundational policy on the appropriate levels of human judgment to be used in autonomous weapons. I just want to be super specific that this is a DOD directive, and so it's not a statutory constraint. It's like, you know, when you label a phone number, like, don't answer this phone number in your phone, like, it's still in your phone, you can answer it, but you told yourself you don't think you should talk. There's a sort of inherent tension in the DOD's framework in the sense that it both supports these guardrails that Anthropic is insisting on. It has this notion that there exist rules above the lawful use standard that Hexit is hanging his hat on that are not necessarily that the lawful standard isn't the baseline you want to have. And I'll note that the AI action plan from this Trump administration actually references those responsible AI frameworks and keeps that going. So that makes it just complicated because there aren't statutory constraints that Hexit can really fall back on. It's DOD's own constraints, but this administration has reaffirmed those constraints. And so open question, I think, on when they say lawful use, how they're interpreting that combination of words.
I mean, this is, I don't expect you to answer this, but something that has been on my mind is this conversation between DOD and Anthropic. Is it driven by the sort of Hegseth echelon as against the leadership of Anthropic's, their dynamics? Or is it driven by genuine I mean, obviously it's driven by genuine policy instances, but like, is this something that like has been bubbling up for a long time and they're fighting it out now? Or is it more the two senior leaders suddenly realized, oh my gosh, we disagree on something, and there's two elephants who are sort of wandering around in the same pen here? And like, I don't think we'll ever necessarily know that, but I think it's given the public dynamics of this, it's just fascinating to see. You would typically not see these big public fights of a sort of use case. So I am thinking back to the first Trump administration, and I hate to say it this way, it was just sort of adorable to think about the Project Maven moment for Google at that point in time, with its very, frankly, kind of small contract that it had signed to analyze drone footage. That at a point in time where AI was like, yes, it was bigger than like things that had been at that point in time before, but it was also not like nearly where we are right now. Those of you who don't remember, in 2018, Google walked away from Project Maven after a lot of very vociferous employee protests, and at a point that was fascinatingly followed the Pentagon really, really courting Silicon Valley for a while, and clearly had not kind of gotten the buy-in of employees. So is that are we going to see a repeat of this? What dynamics are different? What are the same? Is this a much, much bigger deal in some way? What kind of comparison would you make to the Maven moment?
I've been thinking about this a lot. I think analogizing this to Maven is not helpful because these are two like different trajectories. And I think the best analogy I can give you is through Taylor Swift songs.
I love it.
Here's what I have for you.
All right.
I think you should think about.
I knew you were trouble when you walked in.
That's good. And that's not where I went, but now I wish I had. So I think the Maven trajectory is something like You Belong With Me, with the Pentagon really courting Silicon Valley and trying to convince them. And then Google being like, we are never, ever, ever getting back together.
Yep.
And issuing a set of bright lines and walking away, and really this Silicon Valley moment. And it was bold, and it was aggressive on all sides, and it was complicated. And I think the Anthropic moment is mostly like you starting with Love Story, which is somewhat ill-advised and rushing into, but there's a proposal, and frankly, it's a banger, so everyone's singing along. And you've migrated into Champagne Problems.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Okay. And I welcome the Swifties to join me on this trajectory. But the basic thing here is like, yes, on the one hand, they are fighting with Anthropic. On the other hand, Anthropic is embedded in the systems, and they are actively using it, according to current reporting, for current military operations, including in Iran. And it's going to be really hard to like separate these different things out. And there are real benefits to both Anthropic and the government for figuring this out. So like, this is a very different kind of situation, which is Anthropic sought the contracts and built the integration and has proven that they are willing to exist in these operational sensitive defense contracts. On the other hand, they have these very specific and precisely defined bright lines, which in theory, the Pentagon agrees with.
Yep.
Right?
That's what's fascinating to me here is like, it seems as though like, yeah, we agree. Also, we want to use this for the thing that we have said we're not going to do.
Right.
What?
And so I think this is actually a much more surgical problem, which is in the champagne problem sense of who and how are we going to decide when technologies are both lawfully appropriate and reliable enough to be used in military operations. And typically we would defer that to technical experts inside the government. But this is a technology unlike any other, which has been wholly developed and wholly perfected outside the government. And that means that the expertise to answer those questions doesn't exist in the government. And so we have this open question now of how we solve that problem. And it's playing out in an acquisition and contract sense, and it's playing out in a particularly dramatic way. But the core problem is actually a really important question for the government for the next decade, probably, which is you've got a technology where you are not the experts. Now, what do you want to do? Right. And that wasn't true for anything prior to this point.
It's so interesting to me because I've been thinking about this not as a reputational. So there's reputational issues for Anthropic that are interesting. The one that is most intriguing to me on this is not the will you do business with the Department of Defense, Department of War question. It's them choosing not to want to use their technology in a way that they can't predict. They don't feel confident in. And therefore, they're less worried about the ethics of the work and more about the reliability of what happens later that they don't necessarily know what will be. And like, what a just mind-blowing sort of moment right there. Like, just really, really fascinating. And I love that you're framing here. Like, how many people, I mean, you would know, I mean, how many people in the Department of Defense have a good understanding of AI potential and risk as against, let's say, nuclear? And my guess is like the comparison is very, very different than you would want it to be. What happens next? Where do we go?
I mean, just to keep the Taylor Swift analogy going, this is a real like, look what you made me do moment. And so both the department and Anthropic are really in their corners. The problem is there really isn't a good replacement system, right? So Grok isn't technically mature enough. GPT isn't delivering the performance they want. That's how we ended up with Anthropic in this situation. But also, this isn't about one AI company. And while I philosophically tend to agree with the red lines, I also tend to agree with the government on its right to decide what technologies are appropriate for what uses. So I think what's happened right now is we've conflated political and moral concerns with like contracting and acquisition and technology debates. And that has made this really messy. And so there are two tracks. One is the moral and political grandstanding continues and we don't get an answer to the technical tracks, or the moral and political grandstanding sort of fades away and the technical experts can try to hammer out some form of middle ground. I'm hoping we see the latter, where we start actually having a realistic conversation about what this looks like. But it's going to be hard to do that with the political overlay right now. So I think it's a big open question.
Well, let's move on to a happy topic and talk about what's going on in Iran in Warning Signs. This episode for Warning Signs, you are probably not surprised at all that we are epically furious, that we are engaged this week in a conversation around U.S. operations in Iran. we want to cover a little bit of like what is happening here today in this moment. We're recording on Tuesday night, but also as best we can talk through what are some longer term implications for U.S. expectations there for the region. And what on earth was anyone thinking? And with that, we are so lucky to have our very dear friend, Dana Stroul, who is the Director of Research at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. She was a complete badass who served as the Pentagon's top civilian official for the Middle East at the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, now the Deputy Assistant Secretary of War, the DASWA, or however one says that, during the Biden administration, and was a colleague of me and Radha for a long time over the course of our careers at Department of Defense and elsewhere. So we want to start with a question of, as we are here on Tuesday night, for anyone who is just like, whoa, what's happening? Where am I? What's going on? What is going on right now? What just happened? We don't wait, like the short version, whatever the short version looks like. What just happened? And how big a deal is it in this spectrum from extremely big deal to, oh my fucking God, very big deal?
Well, it's really such a pleasure to be with such badass colleagues and be reunited with you guys after so many years of working together inside the U.S. government. So I would put this as like really close to a big fucking deal. The president, and we should be very clear, President Trump has declared a very significant war without articulating exactly what the strategy is, absent having a coherent U.S. policy toward the Iran problem set, absent going to Congress to make the case for an authorization for the use of military force, absent making a clear case that there was a pressing, real, imminent threat that allowed him to do this under his Article 2 constitutional authorities, has launched an open-ended war against Iran. So let me just make a few comments about how we got here. Broadly speaking, the U.S. government across at least the past 5 presidential administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have looked at the challenge of Iran, its nuclear weapons program, its ballistic missile program, its support for a vast network of terrorists across the region, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, proxy militias in Iraq and Syria, as well as Bashar al-Assad, the Arab state partner of Iran until very recently, and the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen, looked at all of the lethal capabilities of those proxies, plus the missiles, plus the nuclear program, and thought through, do I want to try to resolve this through negotiations and diplomacy or military force? Then considered what the retaliation could look like from Iran should military force be applied against the regime, and what could look like in terms of ballistic missiles raining down across the Middle East, civilian populations, critical energy infrastructure, U.S. military bases, the 30 to 40,000 U.S. military deployed across the Middle East at 5 large bases, big U.S. diplomatic missions, and said, I think I'm going to go for an imperfect deal at the negotiating table rather than consider the cost of all of that potential retaliation. And that's what happened until the second President Trump administration. But I also just want to make 2 other points about this. Think about the Middle East and how the United States has used or conceived of using military force pre-October 7, 2023 and post-October 7. So October 7, 2023 is when Hamas launches terrorist attacks against Israel. And at that point, Israel starts to, with the increased U.S. military platform, directly confront all of Iran's militias and proxies across the region. But then a year later, in 2024, begins to directly confront Iran. And since 2024, the United States has steadily been increasing its active support to Israel. April 2024, October 2024, then you get to 2025 in the President Trump administration. And in the 12-day war, that was an Israeli operation where Israel, in a very short period of time, creates a air super highway from Israel to Tehran, dominates the skies over Tehran, pushes back a lot of the missile program, and clears the airspace for the United States to do one 24-hour mission using our bombers and a very special munition to get at some deeply buried enrichment facilities inside Iran where they were enriching uranium. Okay, flash forward to today, not anything like what we saw in 24 or 25. The United States and Israel are building on everything that they did in those previous scenarios. This is a truly combined military operation. Division of labor, shared intelligence, complete operational deconfliction, and you can see them moving from stage to stage seamlessly and sequenced together. And that is where we are today, despite neither leader, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, nor American President Trump, defining exactly what they are trying to achieve in this unprecedented combined military operation.
I feel this very strange combination of deep happiness and satisfaction that you just explained that so succinctly and clearly, while also being like incredibly depressed at the same time. So sort of just like this, not quite Schadenfreude, mixed joy and happiness all at the same time. So here we are in a moment where there was this an incredible Truth Social post that came out yesterday, the day before, that acknowledged that the supreme leader is dead, that 40 plus senior officials in the Iranian regime have been killed. The tweet or whatever we call the truth from Truth Social was talking about how a second and third order leaders who they expected to possibly play a role in a future regime had also been killed, which makes you wonder.
They were just too successful, Lauren.
Yeah. If you were alive and thinking of yourself as a senior leader in Iran today, like, how do you think of yourself in this moment? Exactly. What does this do for your self-esteem? So like a serious question though, what is the succession planning, the Iranian governance look like right now? And what should we expect, recognizing that there is a lot of chaos going on? And is there anyone in the current leadership structure that DC could actually do business with or expect to have some kind of a negotiation with in some way?
Such excellent questions. And as all of us are recovering wonks, I'm going to offer a few thoughts, Lauren, that you're really, really going to like. So
I can't wait.
The first one is all three of us have looked at U.S. intelligence and how intelligence informs operations and thought through the psychology and operational security planning of adversaries. And let me just say, the Iranians like either hubris or just stupidity. So in the 12-day war, less than a year ago, one of the first things the Israelis did was target a bunch of leaders who all were meeting together in a room. So you would think that knowing the Israelis clearly had exquisite intelligence penetration of your security apparatus and the patterns and life patterns of senior leaders, both political and military, meeting together, their movements, all of that at a time when you had this massive U.S. military buildup in the Middle East, basically for a month, open discussion of exactly when Trump was going to start this war, this would not be the time for Iran security leaders to meet above ground.
I'm so glad you said this, because I was like, how are these guys worse at this than like late stage Al-Qaeda and ISIS? Like, I just feel like those guys, look, they've hung out in caves all alone they have their bureaucratic memos, but that's how you try. But like, come on. Anyway, it was surprising to me.
It is also surprising to me, and I think it is just such a reminder for me, like, of humility. Like, don't discount the stupidity and hubris of your adversaries. But these guys all had a security meeting above ground next door to the supreme leader's residence. And basically, the Israelis within 10 minutes eliminated the top 40 leaders. So just operational, first of all, like exquisite intelligence. And also, like, what terrible OPSEC. Okay, point number one. Point number two, this is going to appeal to everything I've learned from Loren about organizational agility and resilience. So it turns out that the Iranian system is extremely resilient. We learned this last summer when the first time a bunch of security officials were taken out, and the intent was to degrade the command and control of the organization. And it turns out that the Iranian system actually has prepared the second and the third, like the number twos and the number threes to take over.
Oh my gosh, succession planning, so important, everybody. Always do succession planning.
Which is just so actually, I have heard people talk about looking at the Iranian system and they use the word impressed. Mm-hmm. The Iranians talk about what they call mosaic defense. So it is dispersed and they have been planning for this contingency. And so what I can say is when I observe the first 4 days of this war, all of their top leaders and the supreme leader were taken out in 10 minutes. And they are executing their retaliation plan. They are executing their response options, and their response options look no different than what we had anticipated when I said at the beginning, presidents look at this and think about the worst case scenario and say, no, I'm going to take an imperfect deal. So they are executing that worst case scenario plan, but they are actually incrementally climbing up an escalation ladder. They are controlling that escalation. They are creeping up. They are not at the top of their escalation ladder. So they are exercising discipline and they are working through a strategy where clearly from the top to the bottom of their command and control structure, people understand. So organizational structure, resilience, that is for Loren. And then 3 is, who's going to replace the leadership here? So actually late breaking in the last couple hours, the rumor mill is that the supreme leader Khamenei, the recently killed one, it's his son who has been appointed as the next supreme leader. These were rumors last year during the 12-day war. They had leaked that there actually was a succession plan in this case. The fact that they are moving from a revolutionary regime to a monarchical system, I think, is a problem. And I also think the worst thing for the supreme leader of Iran right now is to be publicly announced as the supreme leader of Iran. So let's just see what happens in terms of Israeli targeting. I doubt we'll hear much from him if he indeed is confirmed as the supreme leader, because he probably shouldn't be above ground.
Just as a brief aside, I had an argument with my Uber driver on Saturday about whether or not...
As one does.
Yes. About whether or not it was the same supreme leader from 1979. And I was just trying to very gently and then very insistently say that no, it was really not. And he's like, yes, it is. It totally is. I'm like, all right, fine.
They do sound kind of similar.
They do. And they really should have thought about that.
You're right. And now it's going to be more confusing because they're both Khamenei. There's just, now it's Mojtaba Khamenei.
Yeah. They got to put another letter. Didn't they learn? We have the W, Bush, and Bush, Anyway, I'm just saying, you put an extra letter in there. Okay. So that's on I guess I'll call it loosely government succession / capacity side. What about the broader Iranians? Obviously, this is happening in the context of wide-scale protests. We've talked about them here on this podcast. There obviously was a lot of coverage, and even the President Trump had talked about the casualties there. So what has been the reaction by Iranians? And I think there are a couple of different pieces to it. There's obviously the protests and the civil pieces. There's also the infrastructure and different, pieces like that of local damage. And then there's the broader long-term sanctions. So how does it look for the people of Iran writ large?
So first of all, while there is no credible polling or on-the-ground information about the people of Iran, I heard something the other day that I think is really useful context, which is Iran, like many autocracies, goes through the theater of elections. So Iran has something that is like elections that are not at all free or fair, but they do release information on who shows up to vote. And in the past, about 20% of Iranians are showing up to vote, which means that maybe they have some level of support for this system of government. But there's 80% that are not even bothering to show up to vote. And I think that's really important. So one could extrapolate that at least 80% of people living in Iran do not support the regime. and are in Iran, and they are proud Iranians and nationalists, but do not support this regime. And over the years of both all of the sanctions from multiple presidents, and of course, Trump and his maximum pressure campaign, the degradation of Iran's proxy network abroad, a lot of agitation by Iranians that the government, the regime is spending more money abroad than it is at home. The experience of Iranians last summer where they had no bomb shelters to go into during the 12-day war, no information from their government. And we've had rolling protests for years now. The Green Movement, Women Life Freedom, truck drivers, and then most significantly in mid-January, basically across Iran, geographically diverse, ethnically diverse, socially, economically diverse. You have these mass protests against the regime. The regime is unable to stabilize the economy, stabilize the currency, keep the lights on enough for people to go to offices and schools 5 days a week. They've even mismanaged the water table in Iran. So there was active discussion about having to move the capital outside of Tehran. So this is like a supreme leader who purports to represent God on earth and clearly has failed at governing or providing for his own people. Mm-hmm. So the contract between the people and the government has broken at a time of peak Iranian vulnerability domestically and abroad. The regime directs its security services to turn the guns on unarmed protesters in mid-January. And we think that they killed upwards of tens of thousands of Iranians in January. And Iranians see this. They know their government is scared. So that's important context. Right this minute, Trump has basically said, I will degrade the regime and then I'm handing it over to you. Iranians, you need to stand up, oust the government, and claim your freedom. So that's not exactly how regime change works. And frankly, I wouldn't expect to see Iranian protesters trying to reclaim the government right now when there's airstrikes all over Iran, bombs dropping, you don't know when they're going. You can't get information from your government. You can't get information from the United States because there's an internet blackout and you don't really know where to go or how to keep your family safe. So now is not the time to be going out on the streets trying to protest. And you're certainly not going to go near government buildings because those are the things being targeted in the airstrikes. So I do think that there is likely...
Meetings seem to be a bad idea in general. So yeah, that does seem to hinder some organizational challenges here.
I think there are organizational challenges, and generally airstrikes are not how one supports civilian unarmed protesters from enacting meaningful change. And I would say the kind of tools one would want to put on the table, and this, of course, is going to appeal to Loren and her good governance and how you do effective governance, would be to not defund and dismantle the non-military tools in the U.S. national security toolbox. So we have these calls from the president, very hard for the Iranian people to make good on that opening at this moment in time. And I think it remains to be seen in the coming days what this looks like. But I think Trump is just going to say, I told you I'd give you an opening. I ensured that the supreme leader could be killed. If you don't stand up and take this opportunity, that's not on me, that's on you. And meanwhile, I think while delivering regime change would be great for President Trump, I think they're probably looking at whether or not a Venezuela model could apply here. And what I mean by that is there an Iranian Delcy Rodriguez, some remnant of the regime who is willing to work with the United States to some extent and be co-opted into, what should we say, compelled and coerced policy adjustments over time? So remains to be seen.
So, I mean, I will note that the administration doesn't have a wholly inconsistent approach to protests, both domestically and internationally, and how they respond to protesters. So,
Radha, I beg to differ. I actually cannot believe how supportive Trump was of Iranian protesters abroad at the same time that he was deploying the National Guard to shoot protesters in Minneapolis. But perhaps
we're
too soon.
airbombing the city while telling people to protest. So I'll just note it's not great. But I take your point. But maybe let's pull just to kind of round us out. You know, we started talking about where things might go. So what just end state? What are plausible end states here? I mean, is the Venezuela model a model? Is this a military junta? Is this like decades of civil war? Kind of what are we looking at?
Well, you just listed all of the possible options. Let me start with what I think I would propose are U.S. national security interests. Let's start with what would be ideal. What would be ideal is an Iran that is at peace and integrated into the region, not pursuing a foreign policy that is to hegemonically superimpose its will on the rest of the Middle East, and a regime, or let's say a government, that actually invests in, is accountable and responsive to the people of Iran. So you'd actually need internal change and external orientation change. That's what would be ideal. And in terms of hard U.S. interests, we have an interest in Iran that is not pursuing a nuclear weapons program or capability, is not investing in ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, trying to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles whose range can go far beyond the Middle East. You don't need those sorts of things if you're at peace with your neighbors in the world. And 3, a government that is not actively cultivating non-state actors and bad guys to like have a stranglehold on governments beyond your borders. So that's what we should want. It's not clear at all that the current war, which is just airstrikes, is going to get us there. And I think there's a couple outcomes. Let's just start with the best case here. One of my colleagues at the Washington Institute likes to say, when I say there really isn't an organized, charismatic opposition that can actually lead this transition, one of my colleagues says, actually, there are a lot of Iranian Nelson Mandelas. They're just in prison.
Yeah.
And so the question is at some point the Iranian regime has been so effective at dismantling, killing, torturing, and discrediting any viable opposition. Is there something that can rise from within Iran and actually lead this as an alternative? So that is what we should aim for. Of course, there's chatter about things like individuals like the son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, currently, I believe, a Californian, maybe current, and now sitting in Paris, trying to figure out his way into Iran. There are other groups that are trying to present themselves to the Trump administration as viable opposition. But anyway, best case scenario, you actually have some sort of leader who can organize the opposition, work with the United States, and both stabilize and reconstruct Iran and orient it in a peaceful manner. Okay, unlikely. Next case is some sort of Delcy Rodriguez Venezuela model, where there is finally somebody within the regime that cries uncle and says, I will, let's stop this war. Let's return to the negotiating table. And I will do the things that the United States wants. Let IAEA nuclear inspectors back into the country. I will dismantle the missile program. I'll stop doing these things. And I'll work with you to direct the oil revenue in a way that President Trump sees fit, something like that. Third scenario is that the revolutionary religious nature of this government, and it's we talked about the resilience and the mosaic defense of the governmental organization, doesn't exist as we've known it today, and actually is overtaken by the Revolutionary Guards, like the most hard-line, not religious figures. So you basically have a mafia thug terrorist organization that succeeds the religious leadership and becomes more of an organized, lethal, unpredictable menace ruling Iran. And for worst case scenario is complete chaos and breakdown. In this scenario, I think a lot of people think about the Middle East as ending at Iran. There is another war happening right next door to Iran. It is Afghanistan and Pakistan. That is happening next to a country, Iran, with very porous borders. The Iranian regime hosts al-Qaeda leaders. There are major concerns about a lot of bad guys coming in here. Today, there are reports that the Trump administration may also be trying to arm separatist groups within Iran. So you could see a scenario in which both armed surrogates, terrorists, remnants of the regime are all fighting each other with different spoilers and outside actors trying to find their winner or somebody to advocate for their interests within the inside. And you have mass instability in a country that still has the remnants of a nuclear program.
Well, that's great.
I was really hoping that the last scenario would involve aliens,
rainbows, and unicorns.
Yes, unicorns. Unicorns would be great. That would
What if we just like Great British Bake Off style? Like we made some desserts, we judged, the winner gets a cake tray and gets to be called Supreme Leader. The rest of us enjoy tasty treats.
Yep.
Polite yet respectful transition of power. No.
Unfortunately, low confidence.
Well, I mean, I have some small advice for the Trump administration in that they should, first of all, they should be listening to this podcast. And if they don't, realistically, they are probably not. They should get the transcript of Dana's part of this podcast and just walk through that. Now that they have released their national defense strategy, which is entirely focused on the sovereignty of the United States and not in any way around our Middle East policy, maybe that will give them like a cleansing reset to rethink their entire pivot to the Western Hemisphere. And
I would just say the poor authors of the National Defense Strategy must be losing their minds over the military buildup in the Middle East and what we've done, because essentially, like, what could be better for the Western Hemisphere, for Russia or China, than to watch us grind down our capabilities and lethalities in the Middle East while learning exactly how we fight in the 21st century.
It's really something to see. Like that, I remember seeing like there's never been more military air power in the Middle East for like the last, I don't know, 25 years or so, and thinking, oh wow, Bridge Colby, man, you really had an idea one time, and here you are. Dana, it has been like deeply depressing to have you on the show, but also really great. Like you are. I mean this seriously. Like the Trump administration should be listening to this podcast because you just gave an excellent rundown of all the things that they need to be considering. And I was about to say I'm excited to see what happens next. I'm not. I am excited to see how all of your predictions play out and see how we can continue to learn from all of the U.S. hubris, as well as the Iranian hubris in this region, to see like what actually happens next.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. This is way too woke for anybody from the Trump administration to listen. 3 women having an opinion about something in the world, but it was a pleasure to be with you guys. So thanks for having me.
All right. So this week for Gangsha, we are recording in the month of March, which means that if you go to places that change their decoration based on the month that it is, you've moved on to green, my favorite color. We wanted to talk very quickly about St. Patrick's Day traditions. For me, I have 2, which are I attempt to make soda bread every year and never really have managed to get a recipe that
Same.
Oh my God. So like I've made soda bread scones, I've made soda bread, and like it's fine, but I feel like it could just be better. Given all of the things that are possible here, it could definitely be better. The other one is I tried to make corned beef in various ways. My favorite version of this is one year I cut it in half and I put the one half of it in the freezer, got it out thinking that it was a pork shoulder, and made what was supposed to be a pork shoulder ragu, and it was just like sauteed. And I'm like, gosh, this just seems really salty. What's going on here? And then I realized, oh my God, it's corned beef. So I made a corned beef ragu.
How was it?
It was
salty.
I would say good, but really, really quite salty. So I would not recommend it necessarily as a recipe.
Apparently there's a trick where you put potatoes and things that are too salty and they suck up your salt, which I feel like fits with this.
That would have been perfect. I should have done that if I'd realized anywhere closer to dinner time. What about you?
Well, I too have this trying to make soda bread and failing. And I also feel like if I add a different dried fruit, maybe that will solve it. And it doesn't. That's my answer to you. Tried a variety of dried fruits and cherries, berries, cranberries, raisins, nothing really, currants. But
I think that, I mean, the honest answer is what it probably needs is just yeast. It just needs yeast.
yeah.
And we
Jeez.
just, yeah.
But the other thing is we are a family that likes a good door decoration, like wreaths and variety.
Mhm.
So we don't have a good St. Patrick's Day one. And we have painted a shamrock. We've made some green things. So anyway, every year we try to make our door decoration in the hopes that that's the one that's going to stick. And maybe this year will be it. But St. Patrick's Day door decoration, that's our tradition.
My other St. Patrick's Day thing is like one time my husband and I years and years ago, pre-kids, were in Alexandria and had gone early in order to go sailing later on, and we decided to go to brunch. So we're at brunch, we're sitting in Old Town Alexandria, and all of a sudden we hear a bunch of bagpipes playing Scotland the Brave on repeat over and over again very loudly, and realize that we have like locked ourselves into the St. Patrick's Day parade in Alexandria, which goes on for a long period of time and appears to be some very excited bagpipe players. And I just want to know, like, how does Alexandria have like so many bagpipe players? And also for the St. Patrick's Day parade, why are you playing Scotland the Brave over and over and over again? But that is my...
Well, apparently there are Irish bagpipes and Scottish bagpipes. That's all the information I have on that. Please no follow-up questions, but yes.
I'm sure that they just have ever so slightly different accents.
I'm sure.
Right, with that, thank you for visiting us with another round of Sirens. We will see you next time.